Princess Lorena of the Ilari Empire stood alone on the wide crystal deck of her royal ship, staring into the swirling colors of the Veil Nebula as if the answers to her fear were hidden inside its glowing clouds. The nebula had always been a peaceful place, full of drifting light and soft cosmic winds, but on this day it trembled like a living thing in pain. Stars flickered wrong. Strange waves rolled across space. Even the air in the ship felt tight, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Lorena tried to calm her racing heart, but the alarms that suddenly screamed through the ship shattered any hope of peace. A pilot's panicked voice came through the comms saying that the Devourer swarm had arrived in real space, and not just a small scouting group, thousands of ships, a tide of black metal stretching farther than sensors could see. Lorena felt a chill spread through her body. The Devourers were not like other enemies. They had no leaders, no mercy, no desire except to consume everything in front of them. Whole empires had vanished after crossing their path. The Ilari had always believed their beauty, wisdom, and ancient technology would protect them, but Lorena now saw how foolish that hope had been. As her advisors hurried to her side and begged her to escape, a violent tremor shook the ship and lights flickered, followed by a sight so terrible it left everyone silent. A nearby star collapsed inward like a crushed lantern, disappearing. In a flash that left only a dark sphere where bright fire had once lived. The Devourers were powerful enough to destroy stars. If they reached the Ilari homeworld, nothing would survive. Lorena forced herself to move, to think, to breathe. She ordered her ship to flee, even though her voice shook. But running would not save her empire forever. They needed help, beyond what their own people could offer. As the engines roared to life and the ship raced away from the collapsing star system, Lorena's thoughts turned toward the one person she never expected to consider in a moment of galactic crisis, her human husband, Jack Carter. She remembered his warm smile, his gentle way of speaking, the way he often acted unsure of himself in Ilari royal gatherings. He had seemed so small, so harmless, so ordinary. She had married him for peace between their worlds, never expecting him to have any role beyond being a symbol of unity. But now, with the Devourers rising like a storm behind her and her people's future slipping through her fingers, she felt a quiet, stubborn hope. Something about Jack had always been strange, hidden, deeper than he let on. He had a strength in his eyes that didn't match his simple life. He spoke little about his past. He avoided attention as if he were hiding from the universe itself. Lorena didn't know what he truly was, but she prayed he was more than he appeared. Her ship jumped into hyperspace, leaving the burning system behind. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling her heart pound with fear and desperate faith. If there was even the smallest chance that Jack Carter could help, she had to find him. She whispered to herself that maybe humans were not as weak as the galaxy believed. Maybe her human husband was not as ordinary as she had always thought. And as the stars streaked by, she clung to that hope, for it was the only light left in a universe that suddenly felt far too dark. Jack Carter lived a quiet life on Earth, the kind of life no one would ever look at twice. He woke up early, fixed old machines for local farmers, helped neighbors with wiring problems, and spent his evenings repairing a rusty satellite dish that never seemed to work the way he wanted. His small house stood on a lonely hill far from the busy cities, and most people thought he liked it that way because he was shy or simply ordinary. Jack himself encouraged that belief. He kept his head down, stayed out of trouble, and tried to look like the most average human alive. He had almost convinced himself that this calm life was enough until a sharp blue light tore open the sky above his house, showering the ground with sparks and wind. From inside the glowing beam stepped Princess Lorena, her silver armor cracked and burning as she collapsed to her knees. Jack ran to her instantly, shock and fear mixing in his chest. When she looked up at him, her golden eyes were filled with a terror he had never seen before. She told him the Devourer swarm had reached the Veil Nebula, destroying everything in its path, and would soon reach Earth. Her voice shook as she described collapsing stars and ships torn to pieces like paper. Jack listened in silence, and something inside him, something he had buried deep, began to awaken. His expression changed, losing its softness. His shoulders straightened, his breathing slowed, and his eyes became cold and sharp with focus. Lyrina noticed the transformation immediately and stepped back, confused and frightened. Without a word, Jack walked toward his garage. She followed him, demanding answers, but he did not speak until he pressed his palm against a metal panel hidden in the wall. The garage doors slid open with a deep mechanical groan, revealing weapons and devices that no simple human could ever build. The room was filled with glowing metal armor, energy blades, and a humming black cube that seemed to pulse like a heart. Lyrina stared in shock, unable to believe what she was seeing. Jack finally broke the silence and told her he had not been stranded on Earth by accident. He explained that he had come here to hide, to remain unseen, because he was the last sentinel of Earth, a guardian created long ago to protect humanity from threats too dangerous for normal people to face. The sentinels had been forgotten by history, erased from records, and scattered across the stars as their enemies hunted them down. Jack had survived only because he hid himself deeply among humans, pretending to be ordinary while guarding Earth from the shadows. The Devourer swarm was exactly the kind of enemy the Sentinels had been made to stop, but Jack had hoped he would never need to reveal himself again. As he lifted the black cube and its glow spread across his face, he told Lyrina that the time for hiding was over. She struggled to understand how the quiet human she had married could be this powerful, this strange, this legendary. Her heart raced with fear and confusion, but also hope, because if the Devourers were coming, the galaxy would need someone like him. And in that moment, as Jack stood surrounded by ancient power and forgotten duty, she realized that the man she once believed was simple and harmless might be the only one who could save not only her people, but every world in existence. Humanity changed faster than anyone believed possible the moment Jack Carter revealed who he truly was. News spread like lightning across every city, continent, and colony on the Moon and Mars. People who had once argued and fought over resources, borders, and politics suddenly faced a common enemy far beyond any human conflict. Jack stood before the united leaders of Earth, no longer pretending to be a simple engineer, but standing tall in the glowing armor of a sentinel, the forgotten guardian of the human race. His voice was steady and powerful as he told the world that the Devourer swarm was coming, a force that had destroyed countless civilizations and would wipe out Earth if humanity did not stand together. He gave them a choice: unite and fight as one, or fall as billions of silent victims in the dark of space. Something in his words touched the human spirit, something fierce and stubborn that refused to give up. For the first time in history, every nation agreed to form a single defense force. Factories stopped producing cars and switched to building starships, plasma cannons, shield generators, and advanced drones based on technology Jack shared from the Sentinel archives. Scientists who had never worked together before sat at the same tables, studying Jack's ancient devices and turning them into tools humanity could use. Engineers worked through nights, fueled by fear and hope, crafting ships that glowed with new power. The massive Titan dreadnoughts armed with solar cannons, the fast and deadly Valkyrie fighter wings, the long-range Orion beam lances, and at the center of it all, the Sentinel-designed flagship known as the Eternal Dawn. In only a short time, Earth's orbit filled with metal giants and swarms of fighters, each carrying the determination of millions. Soldiers trained harder than ever, pushing their limits because they knew their enemy did not sleep, did not fear, and did not stop. Civilians volunteered to help build ships, grow food for crews, and prepare shelters in case the defense failed. Every person, old or young, rich or poor, felt the weight of what was coming. Lyrna watched all of this with awe and disbelief. She had always thought of humans as a young, emotional species that rushed into things without thinking. But now she saw their greatest strength. In moments of danger, they rose together like wildfire. They did not break. They did not flee. They learned quickly, fought fiercely, and refused to surrender even when facing impossible odds. One night, as the two of them stood on a cliff overlooking the glowing lights of Earth's cities and the flickering trails of ships leaving for space, Lyrna asked Jack if he was afraid. He admitted that he was, but said fear meant nothing if he let it control his choices. He told her he would fight not only for Earth, but for her and the bond they shared. She touched his hand gently, realizing that he had always been more than the quiet man she met years ago. As they stood there together, the night sky suddenly shifted. A trembling wave of dark energy spread across the stars. Every ship's alarm screamed, every sensor lit up in red. Without warning, the Devourer swarm ripped through space at the edge of the solar system. Hundreds of thousands of enemy ships, a river of metal and red light, poured into reality like a nightmare made real. The time for hope and preparation had ended. The battle for Earth had begun. The Devourer swarm entered the solar system like a dark storm, spreading across space in a black wave that swallowed the stars behind it. And Earth's defenses activated at once as alarms screamed through every ship and station. The Eternal Dawn, humanity's most powerful flagship, moved to the front of the fleet while Jack Carter stood on its command deck, glowing in his sentinel armor. His voice calm even as thousands of enemy signatures appeared on the screens. He gave the order to fire, and the sky lit up as Earth's ships unleashed their weapons, bright blue plasma beams. Streams of missiles and long cutting lines of Orion energy that sliced through the first rows of devoured drones. For a moment, it seemed like humanity's new power was enough, as enemy ships exploded one after another, breaking apart like burning metal flowers. Human pilots cheered, soldiers shouted in hope, and even Lyrna, flying beside the Eternal Dawn in her sleek Ilari interceptor, felt her heart lift. But the Devourer swarm adapted quickly. Their second wave was larger and heavier, with monstrous capital ships shaped like floating black fortresses, each equipped with weapons humanity had never seen. Singularity cannons opened like red eyes, firing shots that tore through space itself, crushing human cruisers into tiny pieces. Drone clouds swarmed around human fighters, ripping into hulls with razored claws, and entire squadrons vanished in seconds. Space became a battlefield of fire and metal, ships exploding like fireworks against the endless dark. Jack launched himself from the Eternal Dawn, wings of glowing energy spreading from his armor as he flew into the heart of the fight. He moved with impossible speed, slicing through enemy metal with his burning white blade, smashing drones apart with waves of force that rippled from his armor. Lyrna flew beside him, dodging blasts, firing her interceptor's cannons, and shouting warnings to human pilots who were overwhelmed by the enemy. Every second was chaos explosions, screams, and the grinding metal sound of Devourer machines trying to break open human hulls. Jack and Lyrna fought their way through the swarm, trying to protect the fleet and buy time for Earth. But then the battlefield grew dark as a huge shadow fell over everything. The Devourer Queen arrived, a monstrous ship larger than a moon, with thousands of writhing tendrils and a giant, glowing core in its center. Its presence made every human ship tremble as if space itself feared her. With a deep, thunder-like hum, the Queen charged her main cannon, gathering a beam powerful enough to erase Earth in an instant. Jack felt his blood turn cold. He flew forward at full speed, pushing his armor to limits he had never reached, and shouted for the fleet to fall back. The Queen released her beam, a huge red ray that cut across the sky toward Earth. Jack threw himself into its path, crossing his arms as his armor flared with blinding white light. The force of the beam struck him like a collapsing sun, burning through his armor, sending waves of pain through his body, but he refused to move. Lyrna screamed his name, but he could not answer. He pushed back with every last ounce of sentinel power, roaring as the beam bent away from Earth and shattered against the empty void. The Queen pulled back in anger, her tendrils curling as she prepared another attack, and the swarm began tightening around the human fleet again. Humanity had survived the first strike, but the battle was far from over. The Devour Queen still lived, and Jack knew the only way to defeat her was to face her from the inside, even if it meant risking everything. Jack realized that the battle outside could not be won while the Devourer Queen still lived, because her enormous ship was the center of the swarm, controlling every drone, every weapon, and every movement of the enemy fleet. If she remained, humanity would keep losing ships until there was nothing left to defend Earth. He stood on the battered hull of a fallen cruiser, breathing hard, armor cracked from stopping the Queen's devastating beam. All around him, human fighters were still battling the endless waves of devourer machines. Lyrna flew close, her voice shaking as she shouted that he could not take on the Queen alone, but Jack already knew what he had to do. He told her that the Queen's core was hidden deep inside her massive body, protected by layers of living metal, traps, and endless drones, and that only a sentinel had any chance of reaching it. Lyrna begged him to let her come with him, tears in her eyes, terrified of losing him in the darkness of the Queen's ship. Jack touched her hand gently and told her she had to stay with the fleet to lead if he failed. He reminded her that humanity needed hope, and she had become a symbol of unity between their worlds. It broke her heart, but she knew he was right. With one last look, he whispered that he loved her, then turned and blasted forward on wings of blazing energy, heading straight toward the Queen's enormous form. Enemy fire rained down on him from every direction, but he spun, dodged, and cut through it with unbelievable speed. When he reached the Queen's hull, he plunged his glowing blade into her living metal skin, carving a burning hole and diving inside. The interior was like a nightmare, a maze of twisting corridors made of shifting metal that pulsed like veins, carrying red energy like blood. Drones crawled out of the walls, snapping their jaws and firing blades of dark energy at him. Jack fought through them, slashing, blasting, and pushing forward with sheer will, even as his armor took heavy damage. Sparks flew from his chest plate. His visor flickered. A stab wound opened on his shoulder, but he refused to stop. Deeper inside, the Queen tried to crush him with moving walls, flooding hallways with molten metal and sending huge guardian machines to tear him apart. Each one was stronger than the last, but Jack destroyed them with every ounce of strength he had left. His breath grew rough, his muscles burned, and his mind blurred with pain. Yet he pushed on because he knew the lives of billions depended on him reaching the core. At last, after forcing open a final barrier, he entered a vast chamber glowing with dark light. Floating in the center was the Queen's core, a giant sphere of swirling black energy, beating like a monstrous heart. A cold voice echoed in his mind, calling him weak and meaningless, telling him that humans were insects standing in the way of eternity. Jack ignored the voice and lifted the black sentinel cube, the last piece of his ancient order, the weapon built to destroy threats like the Queen. As the cube began to glow, the Queen screamed and sent storms of red lightning crashing around the chamber. But Jack pushed forward, step by step, until he was close enough to slam the cube into the core. The moment he did, a thunderous explosion of light filled the ship. The Queen shrieked in rage and fear, her energy twisting uncontrollably as the cube spread through her systems. Jack whispered a quiet goodbye not to the Queen, but to everything he had been hiding from, and let the cube unleash its full power. The Queen's body began collapsing from within, and the entire swarm outside started to fall apart. Jack felt himself growing weak as the room shook violently, but he knew the attack had worked. The Devour Queen was dying, and with her, the entire swarm. Humanity had a chance to survive. When the Devour Queen's core shattered under the power of the Sentinel Cube, a wave of blinding light swept through her enormous metal body, and at the same moment, across the battlefield outside, the entire swarm froze as if time itself had stopped. The red glow in their eyes faded, the movements of their wings and limbs halted, and the great storm of metal that had filled the solar system suddenly became quiet. Human soldiers on every ship watched in shock as the machines that had nearly destroyed them drifted lifeless through space. Cheers slowly rose across the fleet, first as small bursts of disbelief, then as roars of triumph that echoed through every channel. Humanity had won. But Lyrna did not celebrate. Her heart tightened when Jack's signal vanished inside the Queen's collapsing ship. She pushed her interceptor forward, ignoring warnings from engineers and officers telling her the Queen's body was breaking apart and could explode at any moment. She refused to lose him after everything they had survived. Guided by instinct and fear, she flew into the wreckage, pushing through thick clouds of smoke, broken metal, and floating pieces of dead drones. Each second felt endless as she called Jack's name again and again, her voice growing weaker. Inside the shattered corridors of the Queen's ship, she finally found him lying on a cracked platform where the core chamber once stood. His armor was torn, sparks flickering weakly from its joints, and his body lay still like a fallen star. Lyrna landed beside him in tears, shaking as she lifted his head gently into her lap. For a terrible moment she thought he was gone, but then his chest rose with a slow breath and his eyes opened just enough to meet hers. She cried out with relief, unable to speak as he gave her a tired, crooked smile and whispered that he wasn't going to leave her that easily. She helped him into her ship, cradling him carefully as she flew out of the collapsing ruin just before it exploded in a final burst of light. When they emerged into open space, the entire human and Alari fleet erupted in cheers, seeing Jack alive despite everything he had endured. On Earth and every colony beyond, people celebrated in streets, lighting fires, waving flags, and telling stories of the human who had done the impossible. Jack became a legend almost overnight, his name spoken with awe across countless worlds. But for Jack himself, the fame meant little. After weeks of healing, he stood once more with Lyrna on the same quiet hill where she had first appeared, and he looked out over Earth with calm pride. He told her that humanity had shown its true strength, not because of one sentinel, but because millions had stood together when the galaxy needed them the most. Lyrna smiled softly, realizing she no longer saw him as the simple, gentle man she once believed he was. He was still gentle, still warm, still human, but he was also something far greater, a protector whose heart held the strength of stars. Many worlds offered Jack positions of power, leadership, and command, but he refused them all, choosing instead to return to a life with Lyrna, helping rebuild and guiding humanity quietly from the shadows when needed. The Devourer Swarm was gone, defying every prophecy of doom, and both humans and Alari began a new age of peace built from courage, sacrifice, and unity. And those stories about the last sentinel echoed across the galaxy. Lyrna knew the truth more clearly than anyone. Jack Carter had never been ordinary. And because of him, countless stars still shone in the night sky.